Welcome back. All right, let's go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. So, I was talking about expansion, and I said, hey, maybe we go to two conferences rather than divisions, and people are like, no, no, that's a terrible idea. Why would you suggest that? Where's that unsubscribe button? Go to six divisions instead. So I thought, all right. So I looked at a map of North America where all the teams are at, and I've done my best. And let me go ahead and explain this. So I've also got on the board the geographical names for divisions. I tried to come up with something different than Metropolitan. Now I know why it's called the Metropolitan, because that's why I'm wearing the Neapolitan jersey. So we'll start with the Southwest, or as I've dubbed it, the Sakic Division. Sure, why not? Because Colorado Avalanche, Sakic. I was going to call it the Gretzky, but then I couldn't come up with one that I thought works for this division here, so this division gets Gretzky instead. So the Utah team, the relocated Arizona Coyotes, end up in the Southwest because of its proximity to Nevada and its proximity to Colorado. So for Vegas, they have Utah and Colorado. Also, the three California teams go there. So you have LA, San Jose, and Anaheim. I think that works. I think that works as a division. Obviously, it would be quite different for Colorado than what they have now, but Utah and Colorado should be in the same division, right? Then you get to the Northwest, which I've dubbed the Gretzky division. I really wanted it to be the one with LA in it because Gretzky brought hockey to California. You don't have three teams in California if not for Gretzky going there in the late 80s. But the Northwest division has a very Canadian flavor. So you have Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg. Seattle has to be in the same division as Vancouver from a travel perspective. And Minnesota is honestly the closest one to Winnipeg. So you have two American teams, obviously Seattle and Minnesota being in the same division, Vancouver and Minnesota. Well, Vancouver's done it before, many years ago and all. Not all of this is going to be great for travel, but I've tried my best to come up with where I can have six equal divisions, and it took me a while to put this together. I had to move some teams around in a few divisions. And then you get to the Central, which I've labeled the Hull, and here's why. You have Bobby Hull in Chicago, Brett Hull in St. Louis, Brett Hull in Dallas, the Hull division it is. Now, so this is where the Arizona Coyotes would go when they return, and that's the idea of if Arizona returns, right? So just going down that rabbit hole and saying, yes, 5 years from now we get the Coyotes back. They go in the same division as Dallas, Houston. So the new Houston team would go here, so I'm using a Rockets magnet, because why not? Just like I've got the Utah Jazz one there. Multiple Utah Jazz magnets for people paying attention at home. Nashville, Chicago, and St. Louis. Now, I've heard people say, and I've said this myself, that Nashville makes sense for them to be in the East potentially, but they're not in the Eastern time zone. It's the time zone that keeps them in the West, and of the teams that are in the Eastern Conference, all of them are in the Eastern time zone. That's why Detroit's not in the West. Detroit is relatively close to Chicago, but again, they're not in the same time zone. So when the NHL decided to do some moving around, Detroit wanted to be in the East. Detroit basically demanded that. They wanted to be in the East and not have to have so many games outside of their own time zone and be going out to the West Coast so often. So, the idea that Detroit and Chicago should be in the same division, I'm not going to argue. I think that would work. But switching around, putting Nashville in the Southeast, say, would work for on some level, but the time zone I think is where the difference is. So that leaves Nashville in the Central, St. Louis, Chicago, Dallas, Arizona. Basically, Houston's the one that gets added here, right? So that's your West. And then we get to the East. The Northeast, I've called it the Orr division because Boston Bruins, Bobby Orr and all that. I was between that or Richard because, of course, Maurice Richard, Rocket Richard, for the Montreal Canadiens. We have Montreal, Toronto, there's Quebec City, there you go, Quebec, Ottawa, Buffalo, and Boston. So this is on the idea that Arizona comes back in, Houston, Utah, and Quebec, and Atlanta get brought in here. So Utah's the moved Arizona, Arizona's a new team, you guys get it. But yeah, Quebec City in there. Buffalo has to be in that division because Buffalo and Toronto, that rivalry and everything. And then for Buffalo, too, they get a lot of traffic from Canada. They have fans come down from Canada. And Boston. I think Boston and Montreal, Boston and Toronto, they kind of have to be in the same division, right? And obviously, Quebec has to be in the same division as Montreal. Ottawa has to be in the same division as Toronto. So those 6 to me made sense. Then you get to the Southeast. I'm going with Esposito as the name if you wanted to give it a name instead of the geographic location, because Phil Esposito brought the Tampa Bay Lightning to life. So that's the reason why this one's the Esposito division. You have Florida, the new Atlanta Thrashers, who I'm sure will not be called the Thrashers, but hey, I got Thrashers magnet. Toronto is up here. Tampa Bay is the one that I meant to say. So you've got Florida, Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Washington, and Columbus. And again, just looking at a map, the southernmost would be Washington and Columbus. Washington was in the Southeast Division the last time we had one. For Columbus, it would be a little bit different, but maybe a bit easier for Columbus than the division they've been in. Maybe that's part of the reason that they're as far out of the playoffs as they've been. But either way, that would be my pick for Southeast. And then the Metropolitan Division or the Howe Division, because Gordie Howe, Detroit. Islanders, New Jersey, Rangers all have to be together. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh have to be in the same division, which leaves Detroit. And Detroit, still in that area. I really wanted to have Detroit in the same division as Toronto and Montreal and Boston, to be honest, for that original 6 sort of flavor to it. But yeah, just geographically, it makes more sense for Detroit to be in this division with these teams. If you're bringing in Quebec City, if you're bringing in Atlanta, and if you're splitting it up into 3 different divisions, at least that's how I view it. Now, from a scheduling perspective, this kind of works out. So you play the 5 other teams in your division 6 times. That'll be 30 games. 4 games against the 12 teams from the rest of your conference. That's 48 games there. That ends up being a 78-game schedule. So that's not going to work, is it? No. So, because, again, NHL owners want to see teams from the other conference. So in order to make that work, and again, a 78-game schedule, I don't think that would be the end of the world, but we move on. It works pretty well if you go 4 games against the other teams in your division. So that's 20 games there, and then 2 games against everybody else. 2 games against the rest of the league, so that's 60 games. You have 80 altogether. One thing that I've said when we've talked about expansion before, one thing that's pretty obvious to me is that it's going to hurt the ability to create more rivalries if you are insisting on playing 2 games against every single team in the league. If you're insisting that you have to host every single team, and if there are 36 teams, that means 35 different home dates, right? If you're looking at 35 different teams, which leaves, if we're going to have an 82-game schedule, 6 home dates where you could have multiple teams coming in. And so it gets a little more daunting, right? Trying to be able to keep it where, and again, for the divisions, 4 games against all 5 teams in the division, that's pretty good. I think that could be fun. But this is why, too, you have to keep where the division winners are your top 3 seeds. And this is where the arguing comes in, because I do remember this. I remember when we had 6 divisions, and sometimes a division winner might have less points than a team that finished 4th or 5th. And so the argument would come in of, well, wait a minute, they shouldn't be there. But they won the games against their division. There's always the argument to be made that maybe a division winner has a lower point total than another division winner because maybe they had a bit of an easier schedule. Maybe the teams in their division were a little bit easier than the one for the team that had less points. So the idea of ranking the seeds 1 through 3 as division winners, the one thing this does is it gets rid of the divisional playoffs that we have currently. It really doesn't work unless you expand the playoffs. So basically you could have it where, say, 3 teams in each division make it. Well, that's 18 teams. So then you got to whittle it down to 16, and you come up with some sort of a play-in formula, which would whittle it down to 16. So it's not a perfect solution by any measure, but I do think that the NHL is headed in this direction. I do think we're going to end up with 36 teams. It's a matter of when. I think they'll go to 34 first, obviously, and then, well, I say obviously just because I don't think you add 4 teams at once. That'd be absolute chaos. But I do think we end up getting to 36. So I had to put 4 different ones on the board, and I thought, well, Atlanta's coming in. Houston is serious. Obviously, Arizona has that window where they could bring a team back. And honestly, of the remaining areas where you could put a team, Quebec City does make sense. And we'll see whether or not the NHL changes their mind on that. But again, you have to decide if you want to keep the divisions and you want to mess around with that. It has to make sense geographically for the divisions going forward. So let's say, for instance, Milwaukee. Just throw Milwaukee out there. Milwaukee'd have to go into the Central. Then you're kind of bumping Nashville over to likely the Southeast Division. You might bump Washington then into this division and Detroit into this division. So just thinking of it that way. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you think the NHL should approach this if we get to 36 teams? Do you go to 6 divisions? Do you go to 2 conferences? Let me know your thoughts. I don't think there's a wrong answer to this because we don't know for sure yet what's going to take place, but it definitely feels like the wheels are turning towards another expansion era. And every single time there's expansion, there's always but we're going to dilute the talent pool. There's not enough players. There's yada, yada, yada. But the NHL very much of the mind that getting more money is a good thing. So that's where we're at. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.